Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders. This is the show where I speak with the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I am really excited to be joined by Nicola Grant. Nicola is the Chief People Officer for Hiscox, a well-known brand of which we are at Dial also a customer. Nicola worked previously for large global organisations, including ING, where she was Senior HR Director across the board within global functions. And interestingly, she started her career not within HR, but within the household name Boots. We're going to be talking about a range of different subjects today, everything from diversity and inclusion through to cross-cultural leadership. Welcome to the show, Nicola.
Thank you very much. That's a very nice introduction, and I'm so happy you're on brand and being insured by Hiscox. It's good to hear.
And they get a great service as well, and I swear I'm not paying us to say this, but Nicola, I'm so pleased to have you on the show. And as I said before we started, I have been stalking your profile for some while. Tell us a little bit about how you came to be where you are today.
Yeah, well, I start back where I grew up. I mean, I grew up in the Midlands, a small town in Northamptonshire, where I think everybody sort of looked the same. Everyone was pretty much outwardly the same. And I think throughout my childhood, I've always had a really strong kind of learning orientation. I've always been really curious about everything, to be honest. And we would visit London with my family, and I would be so fascinated by, the rich sort of multicultural environment that I would see, which was nothing like where I grew up. And I found it quite exciting, and I definitely wanted to experience more of that. My parents didn't go to university. Academic success wasn't really a priority for them. Working hard, treating people well, having good manners, all of those things were really important, but there was no pressure or really expectation to be academically successful. And most of my childhood, I was spent sort of outdoors, riding horses. I assumed I would do something, I don't know, a professional horse rider, something with animals. I didn't expect to be doing the job I am today. I didn't even know probably what this job was or that it even existed. But I was the eldest child. I was the first person to go to university in the family. And I think going to university really opened my eyes to the world of possibilities. I absolutely loved meeting people from all walks of life. I loved the sort of rich, diverse and vibrant sort of environment that I was part of. And in the freedom really to show up as yourself. I mean, I'd come from an environment which was everyone was very similar and there weren't really anybody that was different. So just being in that kind of environment, I absolutely loved. I mean, you mentioned I didn't start in HR, and I didn't. I worked for Boots. That was my first job out of university. And I really fell into HR as a career because I followed my husband to London after we graduated. He got a job on a graduate program. And so I left my job at Boots, which I actually really loved, and followed him. And it was totally normal for me to expect that his career would come first and that I would support him and that I would probably pay less attention to my own career. So followed him to London and as a result of that, actually looked for roles, looked for jobs, and ended up finding a position which led to me eventually being in HR. But it wasn't a thought process where I thought this is the job I absolutely want to do and I'm going to try to get into this industry. It just really wasn't. And then, over time, things changed for us. My husband suffers from some health problems, and that's really meant over time that his career started to take a back seat. And eventually he gave up work. So that was a real challenge for us as a couple. It's a very different dynamic. First of all, his career was sort of leading, and then suddenly, his career takes a back seat. But that was an opportunity for me because it meant that my career was able to flourish in a way that I don't think it would have otherwise done. Obviously, I would prefer he was well, but I don't think I'd be doing the job I'm doing today if he hadn't changed sort of his career aspirations in that way. I think it just wouldn't have happened. And the fact that he's incredibly supportive and he's been flexible and willing to move for my career has enabled me to take some of the opportunities that I've been offered, actually, such as international roles. So yeah, I think that definitely changed things. I'm a real believer in positive mindset and the power of a sort of positive outlook. And we could have easily taken a different path when he became ill, but actually we've made the best, I think, and the most out of our circumstances. And so, yeah, whilst it wasn't planned, I have always taken opportunities and roles that excite me, and I've made most out of every opportunity that I've been given. And as you said, I'm now the Chief People Officer of Hiscox. It's a UK listed business. It's headquartered in Bermuda, and it's an insurance company of nearly 3,500 people. We've got 34 offices in 14 countries. And I've been here now since September 22. I joined after spending 17 years actually at ING. So I was at ING for a long time, based in various different locations. And I was hired to transform the HR function, very much with the agenda to make it scalable, more strategic, very much a partner that influences business outcomes. And I think one of the first things that I did when I took the role was to change the title. So from HR to people, actually. So we're now known as the people function. And that for me is really important because words do matter and language matters. And I think sort of treating humans as resources is not the values that we have as an organization, and people feels far more aligned to our values. So that's something that I was very passionate about, and I'm really proud for a company that lives its values. So yeah, and I think we've got a number of priorities as a function, and they all boil down to having the right people with the right skills in the right place. And for that means we require diversity of skills, thought, backgrounds, and building this into everything that we're doing is really important to me. Over my career, what I've seen actually is that you really do need to build it into everyday processes. If it's an add-on, whether you have somebody that only focuses on that and it isn't part of everyone's daily work, I think in the past that hasn't worked for me so well. It being integrated into the systems is really critical. And it's probably a bit of a controversial opinion because I know that you're a massive champion of chief diversity officers, and I don't want to take away anything from the great work that they do, but I think partnering with the people function, really understanding how to embed what they do into all the processes and practices that we have is absolutely critical if you're going to make an impact. And I'm not always sure we do that well enough. And I have a real belief as well that if we put our attention into developing amazing leaders, and you develop management practices that are fit for the organization, that can have a really sort of an exponential impact in the outcomes for DE&I and belonging. And those things always sound really easy, but they're very difficult to achieve often. We know behavior change is really hard. And trying to make it as simple as possible by embedding it in the things that we already do, I think it is an easier way of getting people to change their behaviour. And examples of things like talent acquisition. Do we ensure that our talent acquisition colleagues have a process by which business leaders are only shown short lists of candidates that are diverse? And if they don't have a diverse list, then they don't show that to the business leader, and you can't progress with the recruitment activity. Those types of things really help to just make it part of the way we do things. The other thing I've observed coming from insurance, from banking, is insurance is quite insular as a sector. A lot of people know each other. It's very relationship driven. And hiring outside of sector isn't always as typical as I would see it in other industries. So finding ways to bring talent in from different backgrounds is something that I'm very passionate about. And it will be a key pillar of our talent acquisition and early careers approach as we sort of develop that out over the next months. And that also brings me to the skills agenda. Part of what we're also focused on is, if you strip away some of the specific experience requirements, some of the specific education requirements, and focus really precisely on the specific skills you need for a role, that automatically opens up a whole world of possible candidates that you otherwise wouldn't have considered. So transitioning to a skills-based organisation is something that we're also building towards at Hiscox. So we've got a really really nice agenda. I mean, it's a phenomenal company with just brilliant opportunity to make an impact, and that's what I love about it. But yeah, so big agenda, but that's kind of a potted history of how I ended up in the position I'm in today.
Nicola, you have no idea how difficult it was for me not to interrupt, because I've been sat here just being like, oh my goodness, there's so many things I wanted to say. And what's wonderful is your humility as you talk through this potted history of what is actually an incredible success personally and professionally. When you mention, even back to your parents, this story of upward social mobility, you talk so beautifully about you and your husband, and he sounds amazing as well, Nathan, that you've had this relationship since teens essentially, and you've then shared, and it has been what is often people forget how gender equality and the stereotypical roles even a decade, 2 decades ago, was so unbelievably different. And so actually really owning that as a couple and between you, I just think that is wonderful. And getting into as well the skills as well, it's super interesting. But the journey to getting to the top as chief people officer, absolutely concur, by the way, on the title change, and how when you say, oh, it has a function, I've never heard that. I love the title chief people officer, but the whole functionality of that side of things in language is so key as we are adapting and living in such a modern and fast-paced world. And as you were talking, it made me think talent is everywhere and opportunity is not. And so clearly it is something that runs deep with you personally, but clearly feeds from the top as well. Now, Aki, who speaks super highly of you, and upward social mobility is something which is key. And so I just it's wonderful that you have been personal proponent and champion for that as well.
Yeah, no, exactly, definitely.
So moving gears slightly into some of the other great work that you're doing around belonging and inclusion. Talk to us a little bit more about kind of this, the concept of belonging and why psychological safety is so important. And, equally, I think a lot of this, you may well have learned from living and working abroad in many different places and with truly global organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I think having, diverse, inclusive workplace where people feel that they belong and that they are psychologically safe, don't very often hear people disagreeing with that. It's quite hard to disagree with as a concept. And we all know that environments where people feel like that do the best work. And, you talk about this a lot on your podcast, and I'm totally in agreement that there's real evidence that links that to business performance. So I'm not saying everyone gets it right, but I don't often people say it's not the right thing to do. However, I think, I've worked, as you say, for global organizations, and I now have experience of living and working abroad as well. And I genuinely believe in these things, and I think it's great to believe in these things. But what I've learned in my career is it takes intentional effort to make it a reality for people. I mean, I worked in wholesale banking for most of my career. Most of the time, I was the only woman on leadership teams. I was the only woman in a particular group. But it actually, for most of my career, didn't make any difference. It wasn't something that I particularly had any kind of issue with or even noticed most of the time. I felt included. I felt part of the team. I felt, I had great leaders. And I think, I worked with some phenomenal people where culture was very much set at the top. And I've had fantastic men support me throughout my career. So that whole concept of allyship and has been really, really important to me. But that all worked wonderfully. And I worked in London for an international organisation, global teams. And then I moved to the Netherlands. And that really taught me probably that I wasn't doing enough. So, first of all, if I think back to sort of how I ended up in the Netherlands, we had a sort of talent approach at my previous organization, which was that, we identified talents that were internationally mobile. And I was never identified as somebody that was internationally mobile because there was a belief by my manager that I was a woman who was married and therefore I wouldn't want to work and live abroad, which I thought was really interesting because that person had never asked me the question. And he just assumed I wouldn't want to leave the UK. Now, that wasn't true. And he also wasn't aware of my own situation or my husband's health. And so much of diversity that we see is not visible, right? And the fact that I was dealing with those home circumstances which were changing, it never came up because he never talked about it, he never asked me. And probably to a certain extent, I didn't talk about it either. So it was just sort of something that it was never really a topic. And then I was offered an opportunity to do an assignment in New York, which just came up by chance. They needed somebody to do something. I had the skills, and they just asked if I would sort of step in. And actually, it worked really well family-wise. And I said yes, I would do it. And my first international experience working in New York was amazing. I mean, it was such an easy move for me. It felt like a home away from home. My first year in Amsterdam couldn't have been different. So I moved from London to New York. I spent a few years there. Absolutely phenomenal experience. And then I moved to Amsterdam. And it was the first time I'd worked as part of a team where English wasn't the main language. I'm very lucky in that English is my first language. Most organizations have English as a corporate language. And so did my previous company. But actually, often meetings would start in Dutch. The general chit chat in the meetings was in Dutch, at the desks. That was also the case. Often the social references I didn't understand. So even if the conversation was in English, I didn't always feel like I could contribute or I could really relate or be included. And what was really interesting is I'd worked for that company for 9 years by the time I moved to the Netherlands. I knew my colleagues really, really well. I liked them all. I would say I had good relationships with them all. So I didn't expect this experience. I really thought it was going to be an easy move. And, the ways of working in the Netherlands are really different as well. I come from an Anglo-Saxon environment in London and New York. People were in the office at least 5 days a week. It was very hard work most of the time. It's that sort of work hard, play hard sort of environment. And suddenly I was managing people in a consensus-driven culture where people worked from wherever they wanted. Often they weren't in the office. And I really felt like an outsider for the first time. And it was quite difficult for me actually to adjust. And it took me a while to adjust. I mean, I think it probably took me a year to settle into that job, which, considering I'd worked there for so long and I know everyone, I thought that was unbelievable. I was so incredibly lucky that I had a phenomenal CHRO who was an amazing inclusive leader. And he transformed that whole team, and it really became a very diverse and inclusive group. And so over time, that shift of composition of the team helped me, in all honesty. And it was a more international group over time, which was far easier for me to feel like part of the team. But that experience of it being really hard work, it's remained with me, because when you're the only one that's different, it's a very different experience. No matter how inclusive I thought I was previously, it is a very different experience. And you don't really know what that's like unless you've been part of a group where you don't fit in. And so when building diverse teams, I don't think we always acknowledge that's also a challenge. If you're trying to build a diverse team and you're the first person that's different, we don't always put the support around those individuals to help them succeed. So I'm a massive, massive believer as well in sort of wrapping support around diverse candidates and diverse colleagues, because I think that's the only way also to make them successful. Simply saying that we're inclusive and we've got diverse people here, that's not actually good enough, and it doesn't work enough. So for me, really, the commitment to building diverse teams has really stemmed from that experience, and making sure that everyone's voice is heard, that people feel included, and that I make it an intentional part of the way I work and manage teams. And it's been something that's been very important to me. And I think I pay far more attention to it now. And again, I genuinely thought I was an inclusive leader previously, but I think I've just learned an enormous amount now going through that sort of whole process myself.
It's a brilliant example of that sense of really not feeling that you fit in. And really interesting as well, when you started talking about this and we were mentioning psychological safety, it really is that that amount of time that you are then spending probably worrying about how you fit in, and putting that into the context of that being an everyday reality. Imagine if that went into productivity. To your
Yeah.
later point, is diversity of talent one thing, and what visible diversity looks like, but equally, as you said, the invisible diversity, and asking these questions, and often perhaps not in an intentional way from your manager at the time, but just presuming that you would not want to go because of A, B, or C.
Yeah.
No, and it kind of takes me back to my days in exec search and talent, and often used to say that it's no good just having the diverse talent if there isn't the environment for which it is able to flourish. And so it's great that you had been in that business for some time, and I guess almost had a run up before having
Yeah.
this experience where suddenly you felt like the outsider, because then to have lost that talent, it's, you know, I used to call it organ rejection. And then you'd end up often with hiring managers or CEOs and such going, well, we tried to hire diverse, it didn't work, so we'll go back to, you know, like
Yeah.
the example in insurance, just hiring someone that we happen to know that was doing something identical without the diversity of mindset or skill set or characteristics and such. But yeah,
I think
really,
you're right. I mean, I think I was so incredibly lucky that I did know the organisation, and I do reflect on, had I been a new hire from outside, I would have left, I'm really sure of it. I would not, I don't think, have stayed there throughout that year to sort of tough it out in some ways. You know, I knew people enough that actually it was a lovely organisation. I had colleagues that I liked, and even though it was difficult, I was connected enough to the organisation that it was worth sort of continuing to strive through that. I really think if I'd been a new hire, that might have been a very different outcome, actually.
and it shows as well, like you say, the power of leaders,
Mm,
bosses, and brilliant male allies as
yeah,
well. That you had someone who was willing to step up to, you know, because we all need arms wrapping around us at times. Great talent needs to have a good home with which to flourish. And so having great leaders who have been really supportive of you growing throughout those different chapters has clearly been another big piece to the journey.
yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about diverse and inclusive leadership, of which you're absolutely a diverse and inclusive leader. And oh, actually, another thing I was going to mention, circling right back, is the piece around HR and diversity, and how, you know, no offence at all to chief diversity officers, but something which I think is also really key, and something I would love to pick up on, is having a really inclusive HR function, and this where the diversity officer sits, or the
Mm,
diversity person sits in an organization which has got this people first culture as you do. Great, the D&I ladders into that place, because it is a, you know, it's like golden thread that weaves throughout
mm,
absolutely every function strategically. But equally, there are places where actually, if, and again, you know, mentioning no one at all, but if the HR function is not a fully trusted people function, then actually the two can be quite conflicted. So so yeah, just circling back to that, because actually it was a really interesting learning point, and I was meaning to mention it before. But anyway, back to diverse inclusive leadership. What does this mean to you, Nicola? And has it changed over time?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, in the work context, it really means to be able to bring your whole self to work, ensuring that as a leader, you're surrounding yourself with people who are different from you in probably every way. It means acknowledging that you can't know what it's like for someone else in the group. So giving everyone's voice sort of equal airtime, and being intentional about how you build a psychologically safe environment so that everyone can express themselves. I think that's really important and enables you to get the best out of the team, which is, what we all want to do in the end. I mean, we all want to make an impact. The business benefit is clear. So just, doing the right thing is not what it's about. I mean, that is important, but it's really a commercial decision to get the best out of everyone. And I think that's incredibly important. But I also think acknowledging that there are many facets to a person that, you won't experience, you won't necessarily see. And you don't always need to be aware, but you do need to make sure that you're not putting expectations on people in a way, in how they do things, for example. So, I work all hours of the day, I'm very happy to work weekends, evenings, whatever. But actually, what matters to me and my team is that they deliver the things we've agreed they're going to deliver. How they deliver those things is up to them. And I am very happy that they fit that around their life. And I think if we're more focused on, the outcomes that we're trying to achieve and less worried about controlling individuals' inputs, everything becomes a lot easier from an inclusion perspective. So for me, it comes back again to good leadership. I'm absolutely passionate about the importance of leadership and inclusion. Good leadership really does manage delivery, it manages outcomes, and it leaves it down to the professionals that we hire, how they do that. And unfortunately, there's a lot of poor examples out there where we don't do that well. And I think that's really a shame. And I think that's where we lose sort of diversity in organizations, because often they can't work within the construct that we put in place. So for me, it's about that understanding and considering the whole individual. Yeah.
Nicola, I'm really trying to find something where I disagree with you to make things more interesting, but I cannot. I love that you said about diversity being a commercial lever, and also that it is not something which is fluffy, and pink or multicolored and whatever that might be, because often, and there would be, I'm sure, many people that would disagree with me on this, but I don't, and this has evolved for me over time, is I don't think it is a charitable
No.
initiative, is a commercial and strategic imperative. And
Yeah.
so the
Yeah.
fact that you talk about it in a very, it's straight talking with diversity, benefits, outcomes, focus, delivery, yet also, as you said, getting that fit around the nuances of what is important to allow talent to thrive. And that means at times equity and treating people differently.
Yeah.
But really, how much is there not care, but how much do we really need to know about every granular detail if the outcomes focus is there? And sounds like you really learn a lot about this within the Dutch culture, which makes me smile as well, because I have a couple of friends and know a CEO who is Dutch, and he's just so straight talking, because it just
Yeah.
brings that a huge amount. I was
I definitely
picturing.
think I've learned that over the years, to be honest. But in terms of the business imperative, I mean, the reality is we all know the companies that haven't survived because they haven't adapted. And if I think about our business, most of the small businesses in the UK, they're not owned by white middle class men. They are started by all sorts of different people. And unless we can start serving their needs in a way that is, that is something that they resonates with them, actually we're also going to fail as a company. So I think there is something around understanding the audience, understanding your customer, and representing the customer. And so I don't think people would argue with those things, but it's actually very difficult then to put that into practice and make it happen. But I think there's, that's why the opportunity is there for us. I think there's an enormous amount of upside for us getting this right.
That's so well said. And I think more and more so these days, there is intent from the customer to look at leadership, to look at those values. And, again, not just saying this because we are a customer, but when you see and you feel the humanity behind the stories of people who are at the top, yourself, Aki, others, it makes you want to remain a customer of that business versus another, because in a world where, frankly, and especially the younger generations, I mean, goodness, there's over 5 now in the workforce, there is a significant care and buying power from others, be it, B2B, B2C brands, in the kind of brands and what leaders within those organizations stand for. So again, absolutely agree. I need to find something to disagree with you on. Lightning round, if I may, ask you a couple of tricky questions. Hardest one first. What is your secret to success, or is there one?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know that I have any kind of secret. I mean, I think we all have the same 168 hours a week. I'm not sure I do anything fundamentally different to anyone else. I mean, I do love what I do, and often it doesn't feel like work to me. The fact that I'm deeply curious about all things. I'm constantly learning, probably to the irritation of my team as well, because I'm always coming up with ideas and things that I want to try. But I've been given opportunities, but I think I've been selective about the opportunities as well. I have always taken roles that I have been excited about, where the content has been really interesting to me. I've turned down a lot of roles where it's just about the title or the money, because I really love what I do, and you spend a lot of hours working. So I think doing something that you love is really important, where you can make an impact, but you've got to enjoy what you're doing. And, I want to leave things better than I found them. So if I'm not excited about it and I'm not going to put the effort into it and all of myself into it, then, I'd rather pass on that opportunity. So I think it's probably a combination of all of those things: learning, curiosity, positive outlook, and, taking the opportunities that really align with my values, probably, and the things that I find interesting. Because then work, I think, feels less like work and more like something that you just love doing.
Indeed. And learning is, it's absolutely at the heart of everything. I'm a believer that when you're not learning anymore, you're kind of you're almost dead, really, aren't you? And so that curiosity is, you can see like your eyes light up when you're talking about it. And who's inspired you, would you say, most throughout your career and or your life, other than your brilliant husband?
Yeah, of course. I know. Well, I think lots of people. I've been really lucky to work with some really brilliant people, and I think people that deeply care about what they do and they're contributing to something bigger than themselves. I think those are the kinds of people that I'm really drawn to. I'm also drawn to, people that are really authentically themselves. So I absolutely love people's stories. I love it when people are unapologetically kind of really themselves, and I like to have different views. So that I find very, very nice. And I've been lucky enough to have multiple examples of people in my life that have met those criteria, I suppose. My previous CHRO was one of those. I mean, larger than life character, probably gave me the hardest feedback in my career, but he always did it from a place that he wanted to get the best out of me. And so I really felt like totally supported, that he always had my back and that he wanted me to be even better. And I'm so grateful for him. The investment he made in me and my career, I think, enabled me to really develop and accelerate in a way that probably I wouldn't have done otherwise. So, I think I would say him.
That's a great answer. And I mean, I'd love to, I'm breaking my own rules here with the lightning round, but I'd love to ask another question, because delivering feedback is one of those really difficult things. At the very best of people, leaders like yourself, manage to do that. Talk us through, if you wouldn't mind, a little bit around that, 'cause I think it's something that we don't talk about enough, is how to deliver feedback. But equally, there's times that great leaders like yourself and others will recall how much of a challenging time they had, or when they hit rock bottom because someone said this and that, but actually it was almost an inflection point for them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, look, I think there's a couple of things that he did, and which I try to do now as well with my own team. And the first thing is he would always give feedback in the moment. So after we'd been at a board meeting or a leadership team meeting, afterwards, he would always say a couple of the things that he thought went really well. And he would always say at least one thing that he thought you could do differently. And because it was in the moment, actually, you know, it's in your mind, it's fresh, and I found that very useful. And I think the other thing that he really did, which I very much appreciated, I genuinely always thought the feedback was coming from a place that he wanted me to be better. It wasn't a criticism or you know, he wasn't trying to undermine me in any way. It was always from a place where he wanted, you know, me to develop and me to be better than I was. And he used to always have this phrase that he wants people to live up to their own greatness, which I always found, being British, a bit of a, I hated that. And I really couldn't contemplate sort of being great or something. But I think that he gave me the confidence to stretch myself, because I always knew he had my back. And I really do think in the moment feedback is absolutely key. I think not giving a laundry list of things that you need people to improve, but the one thing, it would always be the one thing that you could just do differently, because people can't focus on 10 different things. You know, if you focus on the really the most important thing, you know, often, you know, everything else starts to get better. And I think the other thing, you know, that I try to do, and he sort of did as well, was you focus on people's strengths. You know, how do you make your strengths even better? Once you get to a certain stage in your career, trying to continuously work on your weaknesses is probably not the most efficient use of time. You know, get someone else to do those things. Often, you know, do the things where you're already pretty good, and how do you just get even better? So I think, you know, those are some of the things that I try to do with my own team now, but I definitely feel like he did those things for me.
Mm. That is some great learnings, because I think the sandwich that often people talk about when it comes to feedback, and I'm already thinking it'd be great to do another podcast where talking about feedback, because some of the best leaders that I've met have this way of delivering feedback but still managing to maintain the buy-in and the engagement. And it is
Yeah,
really is an art. It is an
yeah,
art, I
yeah.
have to say. But I like that. I may even re-quote that. I want people to live up to their greatness. I mean, it does sound a bit, also, it sounds maybe a bit cheesy, but also it is like, it makes me smile when I hear that. There's
Yeah,
something that really, and also this whole feedback in the moment piece, because it's so easy, isn't it, to store things up,
yeah,
because we don't want to, we're human, we're people, we
yeah,
don't want to give those pieces because we feel like we're hurting the other person, but actually storing them up is the more cruel thing to do in a way. Actually, almost these micro
yeah.
snackable snackable feedback. I don't know where that came from, but you know what I mean. That's
I do.
really, really great.
I think as well, it's all in the framing, you know, it's what they can do even better, and how, yeah, I think that is also very important. About, it would have just been even better if you had done this, or maybe consider this next time. I think that really makes a difference. Yeah, and I do find the in the moment feedback is honestly that's best received, I find, from people, and people often value the fact that you've taken the time to help them be even more successful next time, because that's what it really is all about, is how can you make them even more successful than they were the time before. And I think if people genuinely believe it comes from that place, that helps enormously.
Mm, mm. And on that note, which is a perfect segue, into any favorite heroes, sheroes, books, quotes, podcasts, other than this one, obviously.
Of course, this one. Um, But no, I mean, I listen to loads of podcasts. I read quite a lot of books. As I said, I'm constantly curious about everything. The one that I really love and I listen to, I actually started listening to, I think it was in lockdown when we couldn't really do much. I used to go on long walks and listen to podcasts. But I don't know if you've heard of the Feel Better, Live More podcast by Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, but basically he was a doctor and he is changing the way the UK medical system looks at health from very narrow kind of specialisms to looking at the whole person, and their whole life in a more integrated way. And he's really trying to influence the whole medical system. And I mean, it very much applies to my husband's health issues. So from that perspective, I find it very interesting. But I also think it really resonates with me from all different contexts, particularly at work. I mean, looking beyond the obvious and specific areas of expertise and instead looking at the whole kind of system that we need to change. It's something that I reflect on quite a lot in my own work, because we know that the whole system will decide whether something is embedded or it isn't. And so you have to think about just more beyond the very specific, very siloed pieces of the puzzle. You need to put the whole thing together. And I think he does that so well. So that's one that I do really love. Nothing to do with HR.
I will have to give it a listen. It sounds fascinating. And it's been a really lovely theme in a way throughout this entire podcast. I'm going to call it the beach ball. It's something I keep talking about. I just don't know where it's even come from. It's this whole looking at the entire beach ball, because it's easy to look at, certain little parts of this, but
Yeah.
it's so holistic in everything that you've spoken about and everything that you embody. And it is, it's an incredible, skill of kind of art and science being able to do a role like this, but then also to maintain that humility and to be able to share, what have been, at times sometimes challenging life experiences, different life experiences, being able to learn from all of those things, and then also equally not only sending the lift back down to others to help them improve and be their very best self on their path to greatness, but then also how diversity does go so much further than just what is on the surface. And that is such an important point that I think even to this day, knowing a lot more about what diversity, people, leadership, etc., is the intersectionality of all those things. We've talked about upward social mobility, mental health, the understanding of individual nuances, cross-cultural learnings and competencies, and some of those key pivotal moments where allyship has played a big role. And then, equally, I really love that piece around feedback as well. Completely unplanned, but one where actually, those are, you can see almost how the weavings of learnings from each step have gone up. And I think also something that is super beneficial to all leaders who are listening into the podcast.
Yeah.
So that was my summary. Any final any final quotes, Nicholas? I know I was like, yeah, it'll be 20, 30 minutes. And here we are a lot later. And
Yeah.
we can't cut any of this podcast either. So it's just going to have to be a long one because it's been super enjoyable. But any final parting quotes before we summarize?
I mean, I often say this sort of, I don't know whether I've got the words right, but a Dalai Lama quote that goes something along the lines of, if you think you're too small to make a difference, tell that to the person trapped in a tent with a mosquito. I don't know if that's exact sort of phraseology, but I think that kind of concept is very, very interesting. And, everyone has the possibility, I think, to make meaningful change happen. And how we show up every day really matters. And I think companies have an obligation to make the workplace a healthy, inclusive, positive environment. And, everyone can play a role to ensure that belonging, diversity, equity, and inclusion is at the forefront. So I think if we create the conditions, to deliver this at Hiscox, and, we can achieve sort of that change for this organization, we can really impact and influence a lot of people's lives. And for me, that's really, really important. And I think we can all do our bit there. So that's probably my final reflection.
Wonderful reflection, and one that's very so on brand as well. Little things can make huge differences. People, thank you so much. It has been a joy. I found myself getting so close to the computer screen, actually, even though most people will be listening to this, that I'm always bumping into the camera. So thank you very much. This is the Diverse Inclusive Leaders podcast. My name is Layla Mackenzie Dallas, founder and CEO of Dahl Global. We've been listening to the wonderful Nicola Grant, Chief People Officer at Hiscox. If you have been affected by any of the subjects in today's show, please make sure you reach out. Do not be a stranger. All of the show notes as well will be in the podcast. If there's anything that you missed and you want to catch up, you can find us on your favourite podcast app, Apple, Spotify, or whichever one you listen to, or visit us directly at www.dahlglobal.org. Look forward to seeing you again soon.